Hello and welcome back to Diary of a Dropout with me, Naomi Balderson. I realise I've been lying to you. Well, not lying, withholding the truth. I realised that at the start of this podcast, I was so open about what I was doing with my life, where I was going, and that was sort of the premise. And then as I've sort of evolved and as I've sort of changed really what I enjoy doing and what I enjoy sharing online, I have become more and more private about my actual life. And it's the same on TikTok. I used to set up my camera and just rant at my screen, and that was what my account first started off as. And that's why I started my podcast, because people loved me just literally venting about my life. When I was at uni, I genuinely used to set up my phone and be like, my boyfriend's done this. Like, I'd struggle because I don't have friends who are like this. Like, I was very open because it was just like a completely secret account. It was like no one I knew followed it. I have stopped doing that online because I really value my privacy. I've spoken about sort of finding my purpose and that whole journey, but I haven't really told you about like actually what I'm doing, actually what I'm learning about, because I've been speaking to a lot of people. If you don't already know, I'm putting on an integration circle in Jersey. I will get into that, but I'm sort of launching my business into, I'm just birthing it. Like, I'm really just birthing it, and I'm creating the business that I need and needed. It's a really beautiful journey, but I'm also realizing how little people know about the subject. I'm very open about my mental health struggles over the years. I always have been, I always will be. If I can ever make someone feel a little bit less alone, then I will. I thought that I would give you like sort of a life update, actually what is going on in my life right now. So at the start of the year, I was not going to be in Jersey. I was actually going to be moving to the UK and starting my business there and starting this course as well, which I actually applied for after Bali. When I became a yoga teacher, I saw it being advertised. So with Psychedelics Today, and I'm doing the 12-month Vital program, which is psychedelic training. And I can put the link down below. I actually do have an affiliate link, so if anyone signs up, if you're a practitioner, if you're a yoga teacher, if this is a field that you feel really drawn to, if you feel really interested by it, I highly recommend the training. It's been incredible, very personally confronting and challenging as well, but to do this work, you need to do your own inner work. It's really an incredible course and all the people are amazing and you get an amazing network. That is basically what I'm doing at the moment, and I'm pretty much 3/4 of the way through that. It's so interesting how the universe leads us onto different paths. I never thought that it could be something that I would do because, like I've said before, I'm not like a sciencey person. I don't have a degree. Diary of a Dropout, hello. I always just managed to do things like not the right way, and like I am thinking now maybe I should go back and get a degree, and I am looking at very like continuing my education. So sometimes I feel a bit of a fraud being like Diary of a Dropout, but it's not necessarily about dropping out of education. That's like never what this podcast was about. It's about leaving places that don't serve you. And uni, like the uni lifestyle was not me. I don't think it suits a lot of people. Like, I definitely needed to hear this, like when I was leaving school, that it's completely okay to not know what you want to do. I think to a certain extent, no one really knows what they want to do. Everyone is just muddling through life and figuring it out as they go along. All in different positions. We've all been born into different situations and circumstances that also play a role in where we go and what we do. So yeah, I'm back to studying. I mean, I have been this whole year, I just haven't really spoken about it. And also because what I'm studying is a little bit taboo or out there, or people just don't know that much about what I am studying. I often don't even tell people. Like, sometimes people ask me like, what do you actually do? Like, and like it's quite hard to explain because I do a lot of different things. So obviously I have my business, my yoga teaching, and now integration. And I'm also studying my psychedelic training, which want to continue my education after this year, definitely, whether that's in the form of a traditional degree, whether that's in apprenticeships or shadowing people. That's where my education is at. And then I obviously do my podcast, which I feel so passionately about. I love doing this so much. It genuinely feeds my soul, like when I'm just sat here chatting to you. I don't know, it just feels really natural. I could talk for days. I love it so much. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. You know, I say like, oh, I'm training to be a psychedelic facilitator, and they're like, what is that? So I am going to give you a very whistle-stop tour of what psychedelics are, their potential, what we believe that they can do, why there's been a sort of so-called renaissance recently, and where I can see the future of it heading. I just asked people to ask me questions about it on my Instagram, so I will also answer those. We're going to go back to the start. And when I mean the start, I mean prehistoric times. A lot of scholars believe that humans have been using psychedelics forever. As long as humans have been alive, we've been consuming psychedelics. And this was on cave paintings in places like Spain, depicted of mushrooms and like various psychedelic-esque things in ancient civilizations, so ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. I think Egypt, it was a blue lotus flower, and also ancient Greece, the Eleusinian mysteries, which are sort of like religious rites of ceremonies, and is believed to have involved a psychedelic brew called Kykeon. It's such a broad field because everyone, indigenous and ancient civilizations, have used psychedelics for a very long time. These are not new things. Like, it's not like we've just woken up and discovered them. And then indigenous people, the Aztecs, the Mayans, have used peyote and psilocybin mushrooms. The Amazon, ayahuasca, Native American people using peyote. Like, I'm not an expert on any of these like indigenous tribes, but the point is that people have been, continue to use psychedelics, plant medicines, to heal, to look inward. This is a quote: "We know ourselves, we connect with nature and the gods." These plants have been ways that humans for all time have connected to something greater than themselves and connected to the sacred and to the divine. Like I said before, this is not a new thing. So where does the West come in? The West sort of hadn't caught up. In the late 19th and 20th centuries, Western scientists sort of started researching these indigenous plants and trying to just like figure them out. The first sort of wave of psychedelic research from the West, I'll put a lot of resources in the show notes below so that you can do your own research and sort of dig more into specific topics that you're interested in. So in 1943, Albert Hofmann discovered LSD, also known as acid. That's a really interesting story. And then in the 1950s, K. Gordon Wasson introduced psilocybin mushrooms to the Western world. That's a whole nother story and why it wasn't done in the best way. And then in the 1960s, of course, you know, summer of love, counterculture, hippie, peace, love, turn on, tune in, drop out, that whole era. And obviously it was at the same time as the Vietnam War. People didn't want to fight. These topics are very, very sensitive. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert, and I'm not claiming to be an expert. This is just simply what I understand. And then came Richard Nixon's war on drugs, the Controlled Substances Act in 1970. There was a lot of research going on, Johns Hopkins and various different places in America surrounding psilocybin and LSD, which are sort of known as traditional psychedelics. That research got stopped. Nixon's war on drugs led to the widespread criminalization of psychedelics. I would say that it's only recently, I don't know, I'm only 20 years old, so but genuinely from my point of view, they've only sort of, the idea of psychedelics has only come into the mainstream in the last 10 years. I next sort of want to go on to talk about like the miseducation around psychedelics. So many of us, our parents, I think my grandparents and my parents were always told in school, if you take acid, you will jump out of a window. If you take mushrooms, your head will be fried like an egg. Like, there was all this anti-drugs propaganda that was not harm reduction. It was just, if you do this, you will go crazy. And just a lot of scaremongering and a lot of things that are actually not rooted in science. That is not true. Those things aren't true. And that's not to say that you shouldn't be cautionary about psychedelics. Of course you should. Like I always say in these podcast episodes, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor. These are simply my own opinions, and you always need to make informed decisions about your own health. But my point is that a lot of what we've been taught in school are not actually like correctly informed decisions, and we are not giving people the correct data to make decisions about their own health. And it's such a nuanced and fine line. And in the 60s, I don't think that it was done in the best way. But I think what a lot of people don't realize is that these drugs have been illegal for like less than 100 years. So recently, and I say recently and I literally mean in the past 20 years, there has been a resurgence in research. It's difficult because people are talking about this psychedelic renaissance, and it is only in the West that this is a renaissance. Like I said before, indigenous tribes always have been and always will be using these plants. It is simply us sort of catching up and also bringing a very like medicalized view on them. I obviously can't cover everything that I would want to say about the topic in this one episode, and I have a lot to say about this topic. Recently, there's been more studies to show sort of the therapeutic potential of these plants and why maybe they shouldn't be completely illegal. Maybe people shouldn't go to prison for doing something that people have been doing since the beginning of time. And it's actually, when you think about it, very strange that our Western society doesn't have ceremony, doesn't have ritual, where we don't gather. And I have spoken a lot in my podcast episodes about a God-shaped hole in people's lives. People don't have a connection to a community, to the sacred, to the divine. People don't have a wider purpose. We are living in this is the first time in human history that people are living without a god. Our god has become social media, money, greed, sex, dopamine. I believe that is where we are at. And I think that's why we're seeing all of the problems that we are, of mental health, of violence, of racism, of sexism, of homophobia, of polarity. People genuinely can't connect to each other anymore. So some of the therapeutic potential of psychedelics from different studies, again, I'll leave them down below so you can have a look if you're interested. MDMA assisted therapy for PTSD, psilocybin for depression, psilocybin or LSD for anxiety or end-of-life distress. There's some really, really powerful studies on that. And ibogaine or psilocybin for addiction problems. As well, modern neuroscience has sort of advanced our understanding of how these substances actually affect our brain. I'll put some brain scans up here. Psychedelics have been said to promote neuroplasticity and also enhance connectivity between different regions of the brain. And then I just wanted to give a little brief overview of the sort of regulatory or legal developments. But in America, so in Denver, Colorado, Oakland, and California, psilocybin mushrooms have been decriminalized. Oregon was the first state in 2020 to legalize psilocybin assisted therapy. And in Canada, there's a special access program for sort of limited medical use. So on a case-by-case basis, people can access these medicines. In the Netherlands, they have a very interesting law. In October 2007, the prohibition of hallucinogenic or magic mushrooms was announced by the Dutch authorities. However, the ban on mushrooms did not outlaw the hallucinogenic species in Secretum form due to the authorities believing it to be weaker than the mushrooms. So there's a strange loophole in the Netherlands, which means that truffles are not actually illegal. In Europe, there are some places that you can legally sit with these medicines. Poor mental health is the leading cause of disability in the UK, costing the economy £105 billion annually. It's mainly due to productivity losses. And I'm not saying this as like people need to heal because it's like missing out on the economy. I'm not trying to be a fucking capitalist, just showing the actual detriment that our mental health crisis is having on our country as a whole. Psilocybin-assisted therapy for depression has demonstrated long-term efficacy by over 70%. Early clinical trials indicate that psilocybin is a safe and effective treatment for various mental health issues, including trauma, substance misuse, and depression. However, the current UK drug laws currently unnecessarily restrict research in this area, which hinders patient treatment, drug development, and both basic and applied research into these compounds. If we could reclassify psilocybin from Schedule 1 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, which was made in 1971, this would align the UK with parts of the US, Canada, Germany, and other EU countries, which would foster investment and innovation in research, trade, and healthcare. I'm never advocating for widespread legalization. You have mushrooms, you have mushrooms, you have mushrooms, but people deserve to know that there's alternative treatment that is not being moved forward by the government. In fact, it is actively being stopped by the government, and that really, 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 really needs to change. I believe it's my life's work. That's why I am training in this field. I believe that it's gonna happen. I believe that it's only a matter of time. It's not if, it is when. We are living in a mental health crisis. People need treatment. People really, really need treatment, and people need hope more than anything, that their lives can get better, that they don't need to live with this mental illness. Public perception is slowly shifting. There is more talk of it in the mainstream, but like I said before, like I'm in a little bubble, like with my course, and like just a lot of the media I consume like is around this. And I guess the books that I read, basically I'm in a little bubble, and I didn't realize how little other people knew about this subject. So that's why I'm sort of doing this episode, just to give you some clarity. I do think that public perception is shifting. I think people are realizing, oh, maybe what I was taught in school, that wasn't actually right. Maybe what my parents told me, they didn't even know better, which is fine. And I hold no judgment in my heart, you know, when you're told something at school. Yeah, I think people's minds are changing, and I think it's slowly coming around. I hope that I can play a part in that. And like I always say, this is my life's work. I fully know that now, and sometimes it's fucking intimidating because it feels like a really big uphill climb, but I think it's going to be worth it. So now I'm just going to answer some questions from my Instagram. I've got a lot to say. You guys asked really, really good questions, so thank you so much. What's the connection between psychedelics and dreams? Someone has just asked my like hyperfixation question. Like I could talk about this for literally hours, but I won't. But basically, certain psychologists have theorized, and well, I theorize myself. I'm just going to go out and say that I think that psychedelics and the dream world are the same world that we access. It's accessing areas of our subconscious psyche. I think the link between dreams and psychedelics is that in a trip being the experience that you have whilst under the influence of these drugs, I think whilst you're in a trip, you get certain symbols and archetypes and messages and words, and that is very similar to a dream, and it's telling you something new about yourself and about your subconscious and about your psyche that you didn't know before. And that is what I think the link is between dreams and psychedelics. I could genuinely go on and on and on about this topic. I think it's so interesting. If you also think it's interesting, please message me, because I would love to like nerd out with someone else over this. What's your most favorite thing you've encountered in a trip? Oh my god, right. Before I say this, I just want you to know that sharing what you've encountered in a psychedelic experience is a very, very, very personal thing, and you have to be very careful about who and what you share with different people, because it's just delicate matter. It's a big thing to share, so hold it with love. The first thing that comes to mind is just a really funny one. In my last mushroom journey was on a stingray with my favorite people, and we were all on the stingray, and we were all just like little orbs is the best way I can describe it, of like just like little black blobs basically on this stingray, all with little eyes, and I could tell who each of them were, and we were all just like looking at each other, and we were just flying about the universe on this stingray, just going and looking at all these different parts of my universe, and it was just so much fun. And that was probably one of my favorite things I've ever experienced, because it was so simple, and it made me realize that that's all this life is, like just being with your favorite people and just like being like, oh, that happened. That's interesting. Oh, mad. You encountered that. That's how you experience life. That's how I experience life. And like, we were just witnessing each other in that and just being like, cool. And I like to say that I was a cosmic stingray passenger princess. I just think that's just the best phrase ever. Someone actually said, what's your favorite medicine and why? But I'm not going to answer that because that just seemed a bit, I don't know. My preferred medicine, or the medicine that I've engaged with, is psilocybin. It saved my life. It fully saved my life. I wouldn't be here without it. Please go and listen to my Why Mushrooms Changed My Life episode and my interview with my dad. Both beautiful, beautiful explanations of what this drug can do. It brought me out of a lifetime of darkness. I still experience pain and sometimes depression, but those experiences just made me aware that there's something greater at play and that I'm here for a reason. I wasn't put on this earth by accident. No one was. We are all here for a beautiful reason. You just have to figure out what that reason is and lean into it. And I see that unfold every single day. Do you think that you would be the person you are today without the help of psychedelics? Absolutely not. It is like night and day before and after my trip. It's the most profound experience I've ever had. And I also think that it's made me want to help others in a really tangible way. This sounds really bad, but I don't mean it in a bad or selfish way. But before I sat with mushrooms, like all I wanted to do really was make money. Like I just wanted to make money. I was just like, yeah, I want to be really rich. Which I don't think is a bad thing to want at all. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing. Money brings us so many opportunities and abundance, and like we need money to be safe and comfortable. I don't think that's a bad thing. But after sitting with mushrooms, I was like, hang on, like I can really help people. I've already referenced the pro-social benefits of psychedelics, but I'll reference the article again in the show notes because I think you experience such a feeling of unity and interconnectedness. I'm no different to you. You're no different to me. We're all just one. And even like the wall and like plants and trees, like it's all interconnected, so therefore you just want to help everything. You want to help the collective. I think it's also helped me connect to people again. I don't know why, but I felt like before my trip I just didn't have the confidence necessarily to connect to people authentically, and I've really figured that out after my trip. I was like, yeah, okay, I know how to do that now. And yeah, just having confidence. I think I always had confidence, but it was very much fake it till you make it confidence. Now I feel like I very much have like a inner confidence and like an inner like I know what I want and an inner fire. It's also helped me overcome addictions that were so deeply entrenched into who I was. One thing I've learned is that addictions aren't just like addictions, they are symptoms of a root problem. And I really think when psychedelics strip you back to your sort of original self, like who you were before the conditioning, who you were before the programming, just who you were before all of it, you realize that the addictions and attachments that you hold are not you. For so long I was like, my identity is that I am a party girl. My identity is that I just love a drink and doing like reckless things and like smoking. Like I just thought that smoking and vaping was like it's actually so cringe to look back on, but sending love to my past self. But I genuinely thought smoking was the coolest thing when I was younger. Like it's not, by the way, if you're listening to this, like it's really not. Like I know sometimes you're like, a cigarette looks really sexy and cool, but like it's just not. But I always thought it was really cool. You just think that's like who you are, and it's just not. Like you're so much more than the substances you consume. It's like, no, you're just you. These substances can like enhance or like take away from your life, but like at the end of the day they don't change actually like your core being. Is there this is a good question, is there anything you regret about your psychedelic experiences? So in general, I don't regret things like ever. Sometimes I'll think like, oh, maybe I could have prepared a little better or integrated better, but the truth is everything happens and unfolds exactly as it should. But the only thing that I would maybe change is that I wish I had a stronger meditation practice before. I definitely have a strong meditation practice because of psychedelics, but I wish I had just really ingrained being able to sit with my thoughts, sit with the different parts of myself, come back to my breath, be a little bit more detached, because these experiences are really huge and sometimes ineffable and sometimes scary, and you see dark parts of yourself, and it's just so important to be able to come back to your breath and to be able to come back to a center, and also a healthy ego. That's a whole nother thing about why we shouldn't strive for ego dissolution, but I'm not going to get onto that today. Next question. Ultimately, people will have adverse reactions to certain substances, leading to a negative experience with psychedelics. What steps can people take to minimize this risk in order to have a healthy relationship with psychedelics? Fucking great question. Consult professionals, consult people who are in the field and who have studied these substances, and do your own research. Don't just take what I've said at face value. Don't take what anyone says on the internet or anywhere at face value. If you're going to make a decision about your health and about your mental health, especially, the psyche is incredibly delicate. These substances are incredibly powerful. You have to make an informed decision about whether you would like to engage in these experiences, and do the experience properly. And by properly, I mean take the advice of the professionals that you are, hopefully do the proper prep, do the proper integration, make the most of these experiences. Don't waste them recreationally, because you'll get the most benefits by, for example, before going to sit with mushrooms, no caffeine, no alcohol, no nicotine, no stimulants, because they can interfere. It's like properly engaging with the whole process of whatever it is. If you're going to do ayahuasca, do the dieta properly. Like, don't half-ass it. Do you know what I mean? Also, being super honest. Like, if you are going to a retreat, you need to be so honest about your mental health history, because there are certain family history questions surrounding psychosis and schizophrenia and just various haven't actually been researched as much as they should, and I'm sure that research will happen in the future, maybe when things are a little bit easier to research. I think it's still in the process of figuring out who should and shouldn't take these drugs, which is why there needs to be more research done into them so that people can engage in these substances as mindfully and as properly as possible to reduce negative experiences. But also, it's so hard to say, because also a lot of people will argue that there's no such thing as a bad trip in their psyche already, and the psychedelics have brought it to the surface. I'm not going to sit here and say no one's ever had a negative experience with psychedelics, or that they cure all, or that there's so much nuance to the subject. And like, when I spoke about going to that conference, and what I really loved about that conference is that it was so critical, and it was so like people sharing negative experiences, people sharing like various studies about why sometimes these aren't good for people to sit with, and yeah, they're not right for everyone, but there are ways that you can minimize that. This might be, I don't think this is controversial, in my personal opinion. I think if you've gone through your life never looking internally, not having any therapy, not journaling or meditating, and then you take psychedelics, it's going to be a real big shock. And I think it's really good to have some sort of self-awareness practice, ease yourself into it, in order to have an ongoing healthy relationship. There's a quote which is, when you get the message, hang up the phone. Definitely the potential for people to sort of keep diving into these experiences, wanting more messages, wanting more insight. Literally crucial to integrate these experiences and to not get addicted to that feeling of weightlessness. This is like my special interest. I could go into it so much, but it's just so important to actually just live your life day in, day out, and apply the lessons that you've learned before diving in and getting more wisdom. And there's an interesting quote from Jung about unearned wisdom. And there's an argument to say that you need to be like incredibly ready before you take psychedelics. And what I'll always say to people is that when the time is right, you will know when it's your time. The universe will align, and everything in your body will be like, I need to do this. Like, this is absolutely critical for me to do this. And you need to get to that point. It can't be anything less. The last question is, would you encourage someone with no diagnosed / perceived ailments to experiment with psychoactive substances? What a great question. I can't say. That's not for me to answer if you should experiment or not. You're your own person, and that's not my place to say. However, I do think that there is a place for people to sit with these medicines simply if they want to be a better person. Maybe you want to be more loving, maybe you want to form deeper, more meaningful connections, and maybe you want to heal some trauma. I think there are very, very few people on this planet who are completely free from human ailments and human suffering. I think we can all agree that most people have some work to do, but like I said, it's not for me to say, and my main goal is getting the help to people who really, really need it, people who can't go on any further. And I want to be a instrument and a voice and sharing my story. Yeah, so that's my life update. I hope that this was a comprehensive and useful episode for you to listen to and get just better understanding about what I've been banging on about all this time. These are some episodes that I've done about talking about psychedelics and interviews and stuff, so please go and listen. If anyone wants to come on to Diary of a Dropout and talk about their experiences, hit me up. Or if you're a dropout, it doesn't matter if you've not done psychedelics, you're still allowed to come on, I promise. If anyone wants to be interviewed by me, you have to have dropped out of something, so think about that and shoot me a message. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Diary of a Dropout Podcast. Subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. Follow and rate the show if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. All my love from my heart to yours. Thank you so much for listening or watching. I will see you next Thursday. Goodbye.